Thank you. So, one of the things that struck me as you were speaking is this idea of the ship of the empire is going down, and should you jump off now, or should you collect the fruits for another year or two? And I thought, what would it really mean, though, to jump off the ship now? Does it mean to like stop driving your car and ride your bike in the exhaust fumes of the other cars? Does it mean to recycle your whiskey bottles? Like, what does it really mean? Does it mean to quit your job right now and start collecting unemployment? Like, what is this transition that we're being asked to make? Because one thing is for sure, we're being asked to make a transition. We can sense that. And we can sense that the transition actually is deeper and bigger than simply living in another way. We understand that it has an interior dimension. But what is it? That's what I'm going to talk about today. And didn't I say I was going to talk about money? Well, we can also understand that money has an interior dimension too. It's something more than any other possession. It's something that we associate with self-interest, with greed, or with altruism, or with generosity. So much comes down to money in the way we behave and the way we relate to other beings. So money has what you could call a spiritual or a psychological dimension to it also. So these two things are indeed related. Many people understand on some level that the financial crisis that we just emerged from and actually kind of just put off into the future a little bit is more than a crisis in finance and more than a bump in the road that we're going to kind of right the cart and keep proceeding on into the future. We understand that something momentous is taking place, but we don't really understand how momentous or how deep the revolution is going to go. And therefore, we don't understand what exactly this transition is that we're supposed to make. So I'm going to start with a little story, a little anecdote that hints at the depth of the transformation. Another thing Michael was talking about is the despair born of the realization that things are worse than even James Howard Kunstler says. When you really start studying it, it's amazing how bad it is. And I'm obviously not a person who feels despair very often. I'm very optimistic. But I wanted to make sure for myself and then also for my readers that my optimism wasn't a matter of paving over the toxic waste dump or sweeping the problem under the rug. See, it's gone, now we can build a playground on the toxic waste dump. But that the optimism incorporated a full realization of how bad things are. So no one could say, and I could not say to myself, Eisenstein just doesn't get it. He's optimistic because he doesn't get peak oil. He's optimistic because he just doesn't know that PCBs are in every living cell now. He just doesn't get it that there's a power elite that controls finance and every other industry. He just doesn't understand this stuff. Therefore, the optimism is false. Because if I myself doubted and thought that maybe I'm just ignoring the problem, then I would feel like I was living a fake life too. All right, so the anecdote, the story. You guys probably have read about this, but there was a couple. I can't remember where they were. It was Ohio or something like that. And they had a toddler who died of neglect because they were too busy taking care of their virtual child on one of these online life simulation games. It might have been called Second Life. And they were so obsessed with this game that their real child died of neglect. And one of the, there's all kinds of atrocities going on around the world, but this one kind of got under my skin somehow. There's three ways that this story speaks to our condition right now. The first is that it kind of is a metaphor for what is happening to the planet. This couple, they were obsessed and completely immersed in a world of symbols, of bits in computers that seemed to be real. And they became more interested in these bits in computers than they were in the real world. So by the same token, our culture is obsessed with bits in computers, which is what money is. And we're so interested in the welfare of this virtual child, which we call the economy, the GDP, that we neglect real human needs. And we do things to increase the money economy that don't serve any real human need at all. But as long as GDP goes up, it's considered a good thing. So in a third world country, for example, the success of an economic policy is measured by, does it increase GDP? So for example, if you have subsistence farmers who have been living traditionally for 18 generations, and then you come in there, build schools, make all the kids go to school, disrupt patterns of labor reciprocity, institute taxes payable only in currency, bring in Western cultural images. Well, I'm glad that wasn't my phone. And then people no longer are just growing their own food, making their own clothes, building their own houses. They're buying all of these things, and they might live in a condition of much greater objective poverty, but they're working for cash income now, and GDP has gone up. And through that lens, in this world of symbols, hey, look, our virtual child is doing really well. The economy is doing well. The only difference really between what happened in the Second Life game, where the toddler died, is that the symbols had lost all connection, had no connection to reality. It was completely a virtual world. There's not even a pretense that Second Life is a representation of something in the real world. But with money, we still have, and all the other symbols that our civilization runs on, we still have this idea that they mean something important, that money, for example, is an accurate representation of human welfare, that numbers of insurgents killed, which is another number in a computer, is an accurate representation of the progress of freedom or something like that. But the more disconnected the symbol gets from the reality, the more likely it is that one commits atrocities. Because all that's happening is little bits are moving around in the computer. Subjectively, there's no difference between playing a video game and between someone in an office in the CIA typing in some numbers and a drone comes down and destroys a wedding party or something like that. There's for the person doing that, all that's happening is little images and blips are moving on your computer screen. And so that's what happens when we get lost in a world of symbols. Now, but this is really, the manipulation of symbols to change reality is nothing new. Human beings have done that for thousands of years. That's what ritual is. You change some symbols, you write some mystical things, and you imagine that something in the real world is going to change. But it's true. It works. It's called magic. Magic works. You can, if you say you want to build a skyscraper, say you're Donald Trump and you want to build a skyscraper. Well, how can Donald Trump do that? He's just one dude, He can't do all that labor, but he has the power of these mystical symbols that he can write them down on a check and a contract and all of these other things. And then accordingly, other people write their mystical symbols on things, and by magic, pretty soon cement trucks are driving up and steel girders are going into place. And so his manipulation of symbols does affect reality. Now, why are symbols powerful? Symbols are only powerful because we give them meaning. And the way we give them meaning is that we embed them in a story. And by story, I mean a system of meanings that coordinates human activity, that focuses human attention, and that assigns roles to people. So for example, building a house, the contract, the schedule, the money, et cetera, it says a house will be built here, you will do this, you will do that, you will deliver the cement. Anything that you want to do beyond the capacity of your own hands, you have to tell a story that people believe in. Okay, so I don't want to get too abstract here, but what's happening today, the change that humanity is going through, is happening because the very, very basic stories that define our world are falling apart, or they're coming to an end. One of these stories is the story of money, the story that says this bit in this computer means this. It hasn't broken down yet, but during the financial crisis, we saw it beginning to break down. The magicians would come up and they would utter their magical incantations. Ben Bernanke would go up there and he would, like everyone describes what he says as mumbo jumbo, right? Which means, right, magical incantations. He goes up there and he says his mumbo jumbo, and it was supposed to have an effect on the real economy. Back then, the Treasury Secretary was Henry Paulson. You know, he'd go up there and say, "We foresee a temporary slowdown that shouldn't spread to other areas of the economy." Right? He'd say his magical symbol, and it didn't work. They kept. Ben Bernanke would quote signal that the Fed was going to cut interest rates, right? And that signal was supposed to have an effect on reality, and it didn't work. And when Lehman Brothers was going under, they tried to speak into reality. Oh, the company's fine. Oh, investors aren't panicking. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And people didn't believe it anymore. And they really began to panic. Because the next level after that of the failure of symbols would be that money itself fails. That all of a sudden your banknotes are nothing but slips of paper. That your bank account statement, which is simply bits switching in a computer, is nothing but bits switching in a computer. It's a computer file. It's not money anymore. Money is only money because it is contained in a story that gives it value. It's nothing but the embodiment of an agreement. It's a ritual talisman. And that's, we live as if that were not true. But when things fall apart, it becomes obvious that that's true. But that didn't quite happen, because the deeper stories that contain money were still intact. Money isn't the deepest story. The deepest story, there's two. It has two facets. The story of the people, which every culture has, and the story of the self. And these stories tell us what the purpose of human life is. They tell us what it is to even exist, what it is to be. Why are we here? Where are we going? Who are we? That's what the story of the people and the story of the self tells us. These deep stories contain the story of money, and these are the deep stories that are coming to an end during our lifetimes. And that means that the transition that's happening is at the deepest possible level, because these deep stories define self and world.